Hey everyone, it's the Cooper Man. A while ago we talked about canon, and a few times we talked about adaptations of works. In those videos we discussed things like movies, TV, or even video game adaptations of other works, and how they deviate from canons and the effects that those have. Which brings up the question for today's video. How far is it acceptable to change a work from its original canon? This is a topic that's often discussed around things like the Batman Arkham Trilogy games, the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, the Harry Potter movies, and various movie adaptations of Spider-Man, various comic characters, and many other works like those. It's also a topic where things like the Halo TV series, the Wheel of Time TV series, and the live-action adaptations of Avatar The Last Airbender come to mind for very negative reasons. Obviously, there is a line to how much of a deviation is too much when you're adapting a work, but it's harder still to discern where that line is drawn. For example, take the Stanley Kubrick adaptation of The Shining. While it's an excellent movie, being one of the greatest horrors ever put to film, as an adaptation of the Stephen King novel, it leaves a hell of a lot on the table. So much so that King himself dislikes how far the movie changed things and went on to direct a made-for-TV miniseries that's closer to his original vision. But the thing is, though, most audiences hated that made-for-TV series and adore the movie, even if they're fans of the Stephen King novel. That's because in adapting the novel to the movie, a lot of changes were made that were medium-specific and made to work as a movie rather than as a book. While as in the TV series, it didn't feel like a proper visual medium, more like TV actors playing out scenes from the book, which is what the TV series was at the end of the day. The thing is, in adapting a work from one medium to the other, considerations need to be made that it has to fit the medium it's being adapted into. Another example of this that's quick to come to mind is Peter Jackson's— What the fuck?!
Oi! You prevented me from talking about the Rings of Lords last time. You're not stopping me this time.
Alright, fine, jeez.
So, what's this about? Oh, the adaptations. You just want me to talk about the good one or the bad one?
Just talk about whatever. Just don't hurt me.
Okay. Peter Jackson's trilogy is the adaptation of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, but considering the amount of pages and how thick each book is, it's no surprise that many things had to be streamlined or sadly cut. That said, despite this, barring a few notable exceptions, I'd say the movie trilogy did a decent job and was respectful of the source as a whole. That said, I understand the book Puritan stance that the movies are garbage, even though I think it's a bit unfair unless we had 12-hour movies for each installment. I mean, look at the extended cuts of the entire trilogy. It's almost 12 hours already. I also appreciate the people who work on the series actually being respectful and doing their due diligence in reading the source material rather than attempting to do their own thing. Looking at you, modern movies and TV show developers. The actor for Count Dooku and Dracula, and the dentist from Willy Wonka, and life's main character Christopher Lee actually met a new Tolkien, and I believe did an audiobook for the series. At least he should have. Of course, the Peter Jackson trilogy is not the only adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. There are also a ton of video game adaptations and, of course, animated film adaptations. One done by Ralph Bakshi that was in many ways actually a bit more faithful to the characters barring the Gamgee Git. Then the live-action trilogy. The only problem was it only covered up to the Siege of Helm's Deep. Considering he was trying to do all the books in a single animated movie, yeah, you can see why that didn't go well. It was actually intended to be two-part, but the second never got made. Oh well. The Return of the King was later adapted by Rakan Bass, who also did a phenomenal Hobbit adaptation. Return of the King, though, it has some banger songs, such as Leave Tomorrow Till It Comes, It's So Easy Not to Try, and Where There's a Whip, There's a Way.
Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, we don't want to go to war today. But the Lord of the Lashes says, nay, nay, nay. We're gonna march all day, all day, all day. Where there's a whip, there's a way. 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 Left, right. there's a way, where there's a whip. We don't wanna go to war today, but the Lord of the Lash says nay, nay, nay. We're gonna march all day, all day, all day. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Left, right, left, right.
These boys ain't proper orcs. A proper boy don't need no whip to get motivated for a fight. But yeah, that's that. Now I'm going to start talking about the differences between the source material and the adaptations done by Peter Jackson. Well, first...
3 days later.
But yeah, a lot had to be cut out or changed. Hey, Squig, did you just skip over what I said?
You were rambling on for 3 days. This is only supposed to be 10% of the script.
Ah, good point. Well, I'll just provide a link to a video series that talks about differences between adaptation and source material.
You could have just led with that.
But yours didn't ask. Also, The Hobbit, like I said, the Rack and Bass adaptation is the greatest adaptation of the source material. Peter Jackson's trilogy, on the other hand, is a terrific example of a bad adaptation. Although, to be fair, it wasn't Pete's fault. You can blame the studio for that. They brought him on to try and fix the issues. That said, the live-action adaptation should have been one movie. 2 at most. There was no need to drag out the Battle of the Five Armies the way they did. There also was no point in having a dwarf and elven romance. What was the point of that? Fortunately, some fans created a fan edit of the trilogy. There's also a really good game on The Hobbit, but I will not go into it too much. This segment's gone on for a while now.
What, you're not going to talk about the Wheel of Time again? What about the TV adaptation from Amazon?
The Wheel of Time only has a video game adaptation though. You made that up.
Nope. It's real.
I just want to talk to them. I just want to talk to them. I just want to shoot them.
Okay then, I guess that's why that show got cancelled. Moving on. It doesn't necessarily mean that changes in an adaptation are a bad thing. Sometimes they improve the work overall. Take for example, Rambo First Blood. As Tracer discussed in my video on unnecessary sequels, First Blood had a number of changes in its adaptation from book to movie, particularly the ending. Rambo was supposed to die, and Sylvester Stallone saw this as, well, mean. Cruel even. That shouldn't be surprising, as the author of the First Blood novel was, a douchebag hippie, and hippies have no sympathy for anyone but themselves. The director and Stallone, however, can empathize with Vietnam veterans. They wanted to deliver a message that is a light at the end of the tunnel. Hell, they wanted to humanize John Rambo rather than have him be a merciless baby killer brought home, because they had empathy, and they weren't smelly domestic terrorists. And because of those changes, we get one of the most heartbreaking scenes in all of cinema, which you can see in my unnecessary sequels video if you want to go and watch it. Anyway, in addition to that, we also had First Blood Part 2, Rambo 3, and Rambo, the 4th movie. All of which had bittersweet endings, but eventually showed us that, at the end of the 4th movie, he finally made his way home. It was a long road, but he finally made it. And that was way more fulfilling of a story than some liberal professor writing his real-life fanfiction where smelly hippies like him are the Chad, and the actual Chad soldiers are virgins. Rambo is far from the only adaptation that's overtaken the source material, specifically because of the changes that were made. We discussed The Shining, but there's also, well, practically every Disney animated movie. Seriously. For example, The Little Mermaid, the film that saved the studio from its darkest hour. If you read the Hans Christian Andersen story, it's a far cry from what you see in the Disney movie. The biggest change being Ariel doesn't die at the very end. Yeah, tragic, ain't it? Sure, Hans Christian Andersen was trying to make a point about mermaids being able to have souls, but she still fucking dies. Can you imagine if that happened in the Disney version? Or how about The Hunchback of Notre Dame? The original book by Victor Hugo is a very dark story and a criticism of both Parisian politics as well as the role of the church in Paris life. But when Disney adapted it, they took out a lot of those dark elements, as well as changed the role of one of the story's characters, Jean-Claude Frollo, from the Archbishop of Notre Dame Cathedral to a mere minister of justice for the city of Paris to remove the implications of a lustful priest in the story. And if you guys want to make jokes about Esmeralda being too old for him, she was not only younger in the original story, but a different race entirely. Oh, and also, public school teachers have an exponentially higher chance of molesting children, so fuck you. There are very good reasons why these fairy tales and stories adapted by Disney got the changes they did. The biggest reason being that a lot of them were written in a different time where you were allowed to traumatize children with these weirdly dark stories of princesses getting murdered by apples and then being fucked back to life. But by the time Walt came around, in a post-Victorian era out of the golden age of American entertainment, having that be how the story of Snow White ends would have been inappropriate to say the least. Thus, audiences were more accepting of Disney making a few changes to stories like The Little Mermaid, Snow White, Cinderella, and so on. It provided these stories with happier endings that were more appropriate for an all ages audience to enjoy, rather than just 1700s and 1800s Germans and Danes with really sick senses of humor. In addition to Disney, however, a number of works were transitioned into movies that most did not even know about. The Godfather was based on a novel of the same name by Mario Puzo. Blade Runner is based on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. The Blues Brothers was based on an SNL skit that most people don't even remember. Even the made-for-TV movie based on a true story, Brian's Song, is based on Brian Piccolo's autobiography, which was completed by his teammate Gale Sayers, I Am Third. All of this is to say that, yes, it is acceptable to make changes in adapting a work from one medium to another. There is nothing wrong with that, if, of course, it's being done respectfully to the spirit of what it's adapting, if not to the literal letter. That brings us back to the original question then. When does the line get crossed between respectful adaptation with some changes to disrespectful adaptation with blatant revision? Well, the answer is right there in the question. Respect. If an adaptation is being made that respects the source material, it's being made with a team who will treat the source with the utmost care and only make changes that are absolutely necessary. That's why very few normal people have problems with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings as an adaptation, outside of the extreme letter-to-the-text purists. This is because while the movies did make massive changes and revisions to the story, they're being made by people who love and respect the originals and are doing their best to tell the story in their own way. Hell, as Squashers said, Christopher Lee knew J.R.R. Tolkien. He wouldn't have signed on to these movies if they weren't going to respect his story legacy. Granted, he also signed on for The Hobbit, but that could have been a contractual thing. But when a work doesn't respect the source material, say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe adaptations of Spider-Man, it shows. Making unnecessary changes like de-aging Peter Parker into a high school freshman, making Aunt May younger for no reason, removing Uncle Ben from the story entirely, making Spider-Man rely on Tony Stark to get his famous suit, changing the race and name of Mary Jane, you begin to wonder if these people making the trilogy have ever picked up a Spider-Man comic in their lives. The answer is no, they didn't. When you compare these movies to the previous two film adaptations, the Sam Raimi trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man duology, while those films did have issues, especially in the final installments of each, they did at least have the heart and soul of the Spider-Man series in their DNA. But when you compare it to the Spider-Man Home trilogy, that DNA is missing, so the adaptations suffer as a result, and just look like they're trying to tell an MCU story rather than a Spider-Man story. It should also be said that if you can't trust a work to respect the source material or its original fans, then what good is it to trust them to respect the audience? 99 times out of 100, the bad adaptations that get complained about are just that. Disrespectful cash grabs. The MCU directors and writers did not care who Spider-Man was. They just wanted to use him because he's the mascot of Marvel, but they still wanted to tell their own story, fidelity to the original comics be damned. And mark my words, they're going to do this to the X-Men now that they have the rights to make movies on that brand as well. It comes off as egotistical when someone does this, like they believe they know better than the original creator, and almost every time, they don't. A lot of the time, those adapting the work not only didn't respect the original, but many times they didn't even consume the original work and therefore have a piss poor understanding of it, hence why they end up making baffling and stupid changes to the story, lore, and characters. Sometimes, changes are mandated by the executives, as is the case with the Fleetway incarnation of Amy Rose from Sonic the Hedgehog. The first of many arguably disrespectful changes to the original character with the intention of, quote, improving her. In this case, the reason why is pretty well documented. The person in charge charge was A, a woman, and B, a radical feminist. The writers initially depicted Amy in a way that was essentially the same as she was in Sonic CD, a cute and unassuming damsel who loves Sonic and planned to develop her in a way not unlike her Sonic Adventure era incarnation. Their editor, however, told them to cut that shit out because Amy had to be, quote, a role model for girls, so Amy turned into a flawless badass by editorial mandate. Not unlike what we see today out of Ma Rae Sue. They got away with this because Amy was not yet fully realized. It's arguable which version of Amy is better, but it's undeniable that the change was made, and the original writers came out and explained their original intentions. I can only think of one time where changes were made to a story with seeming contempt for the original, and it ended up working out in the end. And that is the adaptation of Tron Legacy into a world in Kingdom Hearts, which sort of created a better version of the movie's story because, ironically, Nomura probably had more respect for the original Tron film than the directors of Tron Legacy did. Changes can be made with respect for the original source material, but without respect, both for the work that's being adapted, its original creator, as well as the fans of the original and potential new audience, then the work will always fall flat. After all, if you want to make your own work rather than adapting someone else's work, why aren't you doing that? You need to be respectful. Funny, I seem to always come back to my old video topics, don't I? Anyway, on that note, this has been the Koopa Man. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe as it helps me get picked up by the algorithm. If you have examples of adaptational fidelity and the fine line of respectful and disrespectful adaptations, be sure to talk about them in the comments, and until next time, game on.